A moment of significant change or a turning point, altering your course, is known as an inflection point. In business, these moments have a significant impact in many ways. That's why we're speaking with leaders from across the asset management industry to hear the stories of their inflection points and the impact they've had on their journeys. Join me and my colleague Mark Spina as we explore the business of being in business, with insights that can help you wherever you may find yourself. Welcome to Inflection Points. In this episode, we talk with Amrita Nandakumar and Aisha Hunt. Amrita and Aisha are two of the most knowledgeable individuals in the ETF industry. They've collectively touched it from many angles, so can speak to structuring, developing, launching, and distributing ETFs, regulatory and industry trends, you name it, they can cover it. They're kind enough to let me lean on them quite regularly as I seek guidance and feedback in my business. We'll touch on some of that today, but we're here really to spend more time talking about their unique journeys in the industry. Their journeys, not just as women, but women of color in the industry. Their desire to be in this business, their experience being a part of it. We're going to cover a lot of ground today. Quick backgrounds on both, and I'll have them go into a little bit more themselves, but Amrita has worked in corporate strategy, distribution, and product management at Vanguard and VanEck before joining Vidant Investment Advisory in the fall of 2020 as their president. Aisha has been Associate General Counsel of Dodge & Cox, a partner at Deckert, General Counsel at both Alps and Vidant Financial, before starting her own firm, Kelly Hunt, last fall. They are by far two of my favorite people to talk with, so I guarantee you we're in for a treat. I'm so pleased to welcome Amrita and Aisha to Inflection Points. Welcome to you both.
Thank you for having us, Jillian.
Oh, of course, Aisha. Thank you. Actually, maybe Aisha, I'll start with you. Maybe just as we think back, as our listeners know, the goal of this podcast is really to talk about inflection points throughout one's career, but also life, that led them to where they are today. And we, of course, given your backgrounds, are going to spend some time at the end of the podcast talking about inflection points in the ETF industry, which I think we sit at a unique one, and you both sit from an interesting vantage point to speak on that. But maybe, Aisha, if you want to talk for a second about perhaps some formative inflection points, right? You have quite a distinguished career and have made different transitions throughout, but is there anything that really hits you as you think about your early years, friends, family, school, that really led you to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. I was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area prior to really the internet being as robust as we know it now, probably during the Web 1.0 era, and being at the forefront of the evolution of Silicon Valley and tech, and having attended Stanford Law School during a period of time of such growth in Silicon Valley has been particularly influential in forming my perspective on not only technology and evolution, but how the fintech industry is evolving and how that fintech industry is touching the asset management industry.
That's really interesting. Did you always know you wanted to get into law?
I initially did want to be a lawyer early on, and I remember folks kind of discouraging me from doing it. And I thought about being a physicist at one point, and ultimately landed back on my initial, desire to become a lawyer.
That's awesome. Talk about a different path, physicist or 40 Act attorney. Ritha, what about you? I always reflect back, and I have this particular moment in my life where I always reflect back on my dad, telling me when I had the opportunity to go into portfolio management or sales, and he said, you will be unhappy if it is you, your boss, and a computer. You need to be around people. And I went to sales and never looked back. Do you have what was the catalyst for you to make your way into this business when you think back on those earlier years?
So it's funny. My father always somehow knew that I would end up in financial services, which is ironic because no one in my family is. He himself is a physician. And so, of course, I saw myself initially going through that path and even applied to college as a pre-med.
Wow.
But he always said, I think you should go into finance. I think you're going to go into finance. And so, as these things happen, I did end up moving away from pre-med into an econ major in undergrad. And then I did end up going to business school. But even then, business school was just more about, I always knew that I had an entrepreneurial spirit. I always knew that I wanted to run a business. I just didn't know if it would be mine or someone else's. But even then, financial services didn't really pop up on my radar until I started business school in 2008. And just a few weeks after we started, Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, the buck broke. And most of the folks around me had come from financial services, a lot of investment bankers, investment analysts, and everyone around me is panicking because they're realizing that what they're experiencing is, once in a lifetime. And I really had no context. I mean, I knew it all sounded bad, but I really, having, come from working for the government in a business role, hadn't really had the context for what this meant. And so, I'm at a fantastic school surrounded by very intelligent people. And through those years, just really came to understand the impact of financial services, in our economy and globally. And that just is what really piqued my interest and made me realize that. And even then, I didn't know it was ETFs, let alone asset management. But I think for me, that was when I said, this is exciting. I want to learn more and maybe even be a part of it someday.
I love that story so much. I think there are specific periods of time, like I was in business school in 2000, and I remember taking accounting during the Enron scandal, and like those different things that hit us. I think the experience of 2008 and what it does to reposition or pivot people's careers is fascinating. That's actually when I joined the ETF industry. So I think that's a really interesting story about the way that you made your way in, and starting at Vanguard, and I think just brings such interesting perspective. Maybe if we just pivot there, Amrita, I think your desire to get into this business, I think, was clear. You just did such a great job talking about that. I'm curious if we move to your entrance into the ETF industry in particular. I think you held some interesting roles at Vanguard, corporate strategy, product management, got really different aspects of what is a massive business there at Vanguard. So I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about what led you to Vanguard and sort of your experience there in those different roles and how you moved within those roles.
Yeah, I love looking back on that time because it was really exciting. So I joined Vanguard after business school in a post MBA rotational program, and so I did start off in their corporate strategy division, and I was asked to lead a very cool project on ETFs, and that was the first time that I had ever learned what an ETF was, and I quickly figured out that this was something very different. And this was something that could be really, really big someday. Again, this was, 2009, 2010. And so ETFs weren't quite nearly where they are today. And so as part of that project, I got to meet a gentleman named Rick Giannone, who was the head of ETFs at Vanguard at the time. And he allowed me to interview him among, many other things. We spent a lot of time talking about the Phillies, but in between we would also talk about ETFs. And so when I was done my rotation at corporate strategy, I asked him if I could, spend some time just shadowing his team. And he graciously said, absolutely, please do come. And so, Rick, of course, now is at Franklin Templeton, but it was great to be a part of that team. And a number of folks who are her bold-faced names in the industry really just looked out for me, mentored me, took time out of their busy day to teach me all kinds of things. Doug Jonas, who's now at NYSE, Scott Sever, who's now at Capital Group, Steve O at the SEC, Chris Johnson he's now at Schwab. I mean, so many different folks. I know I'm leaving out some important names.
That's a who's who of
literally. I tell people I really learned from the best. I really did. And just how gracious and generous they were with their time and knowledge. And that's when I really got excited and said, no matter what I do next, I just want to learn everything there is to learn about ETFs. And I really set out to learn as much as I could about them from different functional vantages. And so if you look at my look at my history, it kind of pans out that way. I spent time in product and strategy and distribution and marketing. And that was very deliberate. I wanted to get as well-rounded of a picture as possible because I figured out really then that I someday wanted a role like Rick's, and I wanted to be able to run my own ETF business someday.
It's incredibly forward thinking to know at that early phase the opportunity to really, learn from the best and get such a well-rounded picture to ultimately position you, which we'll get to, what you're doing today, and also spend some time just kind of thinking about the different view you get today. We've talked about this coming from issuers going to not issuers, and the different view of the industry that you get. Aisha, so you Stanford Law School, right? Or no? Yes, you said Stanford
Right.
Law. Yeah, Stanford
Yes.
Law. You graduate. Dodge and Cox was the first role, if memory serves, as assistant or associate general counsel.
I actually started my legal career at Wilson Sonsini in Silicon Valley,
Okay.
and represented private funds and fund managers, and really helped them navigate the exemptions under the 40 Act. So I kept them out of the 40 Act essentially, and transitioned to Dodge and Cox as associate general counsel, and really that's where I developed my grounding in the 40 Act. And Dodge and Cox is, such a phenomenal asset management firm. I think it's one of the oldest independent asset management firms in the industry. And to have developed my 40 Act career, in the beginning at a place like Dodge and Cox that really viewed themselves as stewards, more than just, being fiduciaries, but actually stewards of their clients' assets, was just very influential in how I developed my philosophy around practicing law.
And that's interesting. I think, to your point, such a great place to start to learn. But as you think about when you say developing your 40 Act career, is that something that you knew coming out of Stanford you wanted to get involved in? Or was that something that as you joined these organizations sort of created that passion?
It was certainly the latter. At the time I attended Stanford, I don't believe there was a 40 Act, course offering, and there often aren't 40 Act course offerings at law schools. So you typically develop a 40 Act practice based on your experience, similar to what Amrita shared about, just landing in different positions where you're able to look at, various opportunities from different angles, and ultimately found myself on a journey to develop a 40 Act practice that allowed me to work with some of the largest institutional asset managers as well as emerging managers, and over time just became one of the more seasoned 40 Act attorneys in the industry.
Absolutely. That's a fact. I'm curious as we think about kind of transitions within our careers, right? So we've talked about this initial phase for both of you, right? Developing that passion for 40 Act law, and Amrita developing this passion for creating that well-rounded picture to ultimately continue to grow in the ETF industry. Aisha, as you think about your inflection points throughout the last number of years, I'm thinking specifically the pivot to Deckert, and then moving over to something like Alps, and ultimately to Vidant. The different pictures and vantage points you were able to observe the industry from and be involved in different components. What were the different catalysts that took you through those different transitions?
I really was very fortunate to have started building a private practice from my home office, well over a decade ago. And within the first week, I picked up a large wealth management client and another large hedge fund client, and ultimately built that practice to a level that I decided it was worthwhile to explore having that practice, at a larger firm. And I've always worked with Deckard in one capacity or another, whether it's been in-house and engaging Deckard as outside counsel, or in collaborating with them when I was at Wilson Sonsini as our co-counsel on 40 Act matters. So it really has been a journey of just relationships and opportunities that have been presented to me, and really wanting to just really deepen my expertise and work with, as Amrita also shared, some of the best, in the industry. And so I think, my pivots weren't as thoughtful as they may appear in retrospect. I think it was about who do I want to work with and what do I
Yeah.
want to do and what's exciting. And that's really what's led me to my own practice, where I really am working with people that I enjoy working with, and I'm doing that on my own terms. So I really appreciate the journey and the opportunities I've had to work with, some of the best in the industry.
I think when you get to a certain point in your career, you really do sit back and reflect on that, right? It's, what makes you happy? What are you excited to get up and do every morning? And do you get to do that with people you enjoy being around? And there's a lot to take away from that, especially for those that may find themselves at a similar pivot point in certain phase of their careers. Um, Now, Amrita, you went from right Vanguard, the ground floor of if you think about it of ETFs, especially back in the late I guess it was really late 2008, 9, early 2000 aughts. What was the catalyst for you? You went from Vanguard to VanEck, who was a very well-known issuer, but certainly much smaller than Vanguard. What was it that drove you to make that pivot?
I really loved my time at Vanguard, and I think as I was more and more convinced that I wanted to pursue ETFs aggressively as a next career move, I thought that going to a smaller firm, which it still had a multitude of business lines, but was really known for their ETFs, would just be a great place to learn about working in a smaller environment and being a little bit more functionally focused. Because you have to remember, before Vanguard, before business school, I worked for the federal government. I worked for the Defense Department. So at that point, I had just worked for basically one of the largest employers in the
Yeah.
world, to Vanguard, which is a fairly large company, and then went to VanEck, which at the time was just a couple hundred people, and they were looking for an ETF product manager. And so for me, at that point, having spent a few years, in sales, it just seemed like a really great opportunity to finally, quote unquote, own my own kind of business line, right? Mm-hmm. In this case, I was overseeing a suite of international equity ETFs, but this was my first opportunity to do that and to really learn everything about the ETF from soup to nuts, and also to come to New York, personally was very exciting. My husband was already here. We've been recently married. At that, the first year we were married, I was still in Philly and he was in New York, so that was also not optimal. And so personally and professionally, when VanEck came and said, hey, we'd love for you to join our team, it was a no-brainer to join. And I had a great run there. Really, really enjoyed my time there. And, I started to realize that maybe the smaller company environment was a better fit for me, because I loved knowing that there was just too much to be done and not enough people to do it. And it just meant more opportunities to learn and more opportunities to get my hands dirty. And that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. So it ended up being a really great fit. And there too, lots of people looking out for me, mentoring me, helping me learn every day, letting me take chances, make mistakes, and just get better from them. It was a great environment. And over the 8 years that I was there, they launched some incredible product. I was fortunate to launch a few of those, and just understanding what a different kind of issuer, who's quite forward looking. What is the process of coming up with those ideas and bringing them to market, and really having a seat at the table at first, and then eventually leading those efforts. There's some very memorable experiences there for me.
I can only imagine. I always say that the ETF industry is the corner of asset management where innovation goes to thrive. And VanEck's is certainly very exemplary as you think about what they bring to the market and the unique kinds of products, especially in comparison to Vanguard, which tends to be a bit more on the traditional side. I think it's super interesting to have that background and be there for so long. I love that you talked about getting your hands dirty, and it feels like perpetual learning is what you seek, right? This always, what can I do to continue to learn and continue to expand the opportunity to learn from others? And I guess that if we talk about your most recent transition, Amrita. And I think I'd love to stick with you on this for 1 second, because you and I took a similar path where we went from jumbo issuers, as I'll call them, you from Vanguard, VanEck, not so much a jumbo issuer, but certainly a very large issuer, and me at JP Morgan, to a completely different side of the ecosystem, right? Getting to view the industry from a different perspective and learning about a whole other set of participants. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your transition into, within the industry, but to a really different aspect of the industry, and any lessons that you've learned during that transition over the last 2 years.
Yeah, I know I've definitely enjoyed having those conversations with you, because it really seems like we were taking those paths at the same time, not to mention, we had a lot going on at home, even that we were both pregnant and then moms of very, very young children. So certainly it has been a fascinating transition for me to go from quote unquote large issuer, jumbo issuer to now this side of the ETF ecosystem. And what I love about it is that there's this incredible network of firms with very specialized expertise and very experienced individuals that can work together and essentially bring a fund to market. And basically they, along with the ETF rule, in my opinion, have truly lowered the barriers to entry for new issuers. And it's kind of gotten to the point where if you've got a really great index or a really differentiated active strategy and you have the wherewithal and a good amount of working capital, you can bring your ETF to market, and you don't have to internalize, or you have to internalize a couple of functions, but aside from legal and compliance and a few others, you can launch an ETF and just hire a great network of partners to help you do that. And if you plan it right, and you know what you're getting yourself into, and you're very honest about the challenges of being successful in this industry and successfully launching a product and raising assets, if you're very honest about those challenges and you have a good plan, you can launch an ETF and be very successful. And these are firms that are maybe not necessarily household names, but they certainly are, they should be on our side of the industry. So now that I'm sitting on this side of the industry, it has been just wonderful learning about all these firms, what they do, who's a part of these firms, how they do a lot of hand-holding for new issuers and help bring them to market. And I'm very pleased to say that I lead a team of one of those companies that helps new issuers and new entrants come to market as quickly and as smoothly as possible. And I really wouldn't have learned about any of this if I hadn't taken the chance to leave kind of the comfortable world of top 10, top 15 issuers.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's easy to sort of get stuck in your lane, or get stuck. I say ivory tower, it's not necessarily what I mean, but to get stuck in what you do every day and not see the rest of the industry, to think I personally thought I knew a lot of people in the industry, and I did, as you both do too. But I feel like when you get to this side of the business and away from being at a larger issuer, you really get perspective on the volume of firms and individuals out there to try to help support the broader ecosystem. I found it quite humbling to have the opportunity to meet so many of those people. So I think you absolutely spot on, and could not agree more. Kind of the experiences you and I have both had in parallel the last 2 years. I want to take a second and pivot, and maybe I'll start, Aisha, with you, but Amrita, obviously want your thoughts on this too. I think most folks know my association as one of the original leaders of Women in ETFs, launching the Chicago chapter, and the passion that I and many in the ETF industry have for the organization, just an outlet for us to share our unique experiences and connect, support, and inspire each other. And the ETF industry has been unique within asset management, financial services, where women are leading and thriving. I get asked often why. I certainly have my own opinions about how the continuing evolution and growth of the ETF industry and new entrants has led to women having an opportunity to lead some of these more entrepreneurial organizations. And Amrita, like you and I just talked about, Aisha, certainly with you and your practice. As women in the industry, and women of color in the industry, I would love your perspective and your experience on what that's been like, and why you think that this industry has been so so open to women in leadership and providing those opportunities. So Aisha, I'll start with you, and Amrita certainly would love your perspective as we go through.
So, I think that's a great question, Jillian. When I started in the industry, I think, my opportunities were primarily driven by mentors who would give advice and, ultimately by sponsors, right, who would make the investment in my career and really proactively lobby for opportunities for me to continue to develop professionally. As, the industry's evolved, I think there are people who are, very seasoned women who are doing more than just mentorship and sponsorship. We're also working together as part of a network within the ETF ecosystem. So as both you and Amrita were talking about the ETF ecosystem, I've noticed that the demographic of women that are leading and making decisions and engaging service providers and really leveraging spotlighting women in various aspects has really created a landscape where women are supporting one another. They're giving each other business. They're sharing insights. This podcast is an example of that, right? And so I think we're really able to benefit from a very different ecosystem than when I started out a couple decades ago. And it's truly a privilege to have clients right now that are women CEOs, right, or are leading those businesses. When I started, it was, women CEOs were few and far between in the industry. Now, I'm fortunate, that probably a significant number of my clients right now are led by women CEOs like Amrita and others. And so I think it's a great time to be a woman in the industry. And I think the support and sponsorship, but also just having so many women in the driver's seat who have really built their own table and they've invited other women to join them at their table. And I think all try to collectively, do that. And that's really created a different dynamic that provides greater opportunity for women in the industry.
That's so well put. And it's, women, I remember we would celebrate, as part of Women in ETFs, women getting particular roles, and the C-suite was one that still hadn't been achieved. And now I feel like it's becoming so much more common, and it's incredible to see. And it's just the beginning. And I will say, Amrita, before flipping it to you, as women in ETFs, over 20% of our membership globally, of over 6,000, almost 7,000 members, they're men. We can't have one side of this conversation, right? So it's been an outlet for men and women to really connect and share our experiences and connect with one another around the world. So Amrita, let me pass it to you just for your thoughts and feedback on this question and topic.
Yeah, Jillian, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that we have to acknowledge that the women cannot be successful in the ETF industry or really any other industry all without the support of men. And certainly, I've had the opportunity to participate as part of Women in ETFs leadership for the last few years. And so it has been really encouraging and gratifying to see more and more men join. And when I invite men to join, I tell them, I said, it's not just quote unquote women in ETFs. This is just a great opportunity for you to network and to learn and to meet leaders in the industry and up and coming talent. And a lot of folks will say, yeah, I just want to meet people. And It's never, I just want to meet women. It's just, I just want to meet people, and just really not even acknowledging the gender, but just to say, I just want to meet people regardless of what gender they may or may not be. And so that's been great. And certainly as I think about my career and how I've been able to reach, where I am today, I have to acknowledge, and I know I've talked to you about this, that most of the folks who've helped me along the way are men, right? Mm-hmm. Some have been quote unquote allies who really wanted to help further the career of a woman. But in most cases, it was just somebody who said, you know what, here's an individual that wants to work hard and wants to learn and wants to make an impact. And they were able to see past, my unusual name. They were able to see past the color of my skin And they just said, you know what, she works hard, she's trying, and we think she could really, really accomplish something great someday, and we're going to do whatever we can to help her get there. And that's incredible, and I'm so grateful for those individuals. And I think I think women have been able to make those strides, particularly in the ETF industry, maybe because it is, relatively speaking, a newer part of the financial services industry. It's not as entrenched and his, I guess in some ways just hasn't been around as long as traditional asset management or mutual funds. And, for a long time, as I think back to my days at Vanguard, it felt very startup. It felt very techy. When I think about it, the business at Vanguard, it felt very much like a startup within a very established firm. And the energy there is probably what it feels like to be at a fintech right now. And so at that point, it was just about, hey, we're trying to put together something really great here. It's all hands on deck. We don't have time to worry about whether you're a woman or another gender, or what color you are, or what your name is. Just get to work. And I think when that's the attitude, then it's a lot easier for women to make inroads, because it's just about who's ready to work hard and apply their knowledge and really help create something special. And so in that respect, I think that women have been very fortunate to be welcomed to the table by both men and other women.
Yeah, I completely agree. I do think, and being mentored by a man or a woman, I think is a different experience, and you can really value, as you mentioned, lots of men mentoring you. I've had the same as well as women. It can be a different experience. And I think, as you talked about kind of your well-rounded picture earlier, I think it's important to sort of have that well-rounded viewpoint. And the ETF industry is so unique, right? It continues to be very collegial. The rising tide is floating all boats, right? As we continue to grow the collective industry and help each other, as we talked about with the ecosystem. And so I think you're right. If you're ready to roll up your sleeves and work hard, and I think more and more people are starting to experience that startup within the larger organization, as we see other large organizations come into this marketplace and get to be a part of that feisty startup inside of a massive organization with those resources. And so I'm very proud of what we've seen in the industry, and I appreciate you both sharing your perspective on your experiences as women in the industry. And I hope that others behind us continue to feel that same. I want to start, or I should say, I want to end talking about, well, I guess two other topics I really want to touch on, albeit briefly. One is inflection points in the industry, right? The ETF industry is at a variety of inflection points. I mean, we can think about the time, Amrita, that you were talking about being in business school, and when I entered in 08, 09. And then certainly you had all sorts of things that have happened since then, with different types of products coming to market, different market events. But I feel like right now, and you both sit at an intersection of this with the products you've brought to market, we sit at a really interesting intersection with loads of new managers coming into the marketplace, active and otherwise. You have digital assets on the scene in a way that we've never seen before. From your perspective, how do you view the industry today? And do you believe that we do sit at a pretty significant inflection point that we'll look back on and really think that this was a time that changed the industry? And maybe, Aisha, let me start with you.
I think you're absolutely right, Jillian. This is an unprecedented inflection point in the industry. It's interesting to see, the digital asset managers, right, or the large issuers getting into digital assets really disrupt what has been, the traditional asset management and ETF industry. It's interesting to hear clients often say, much more than they previously would say, they want to be first. Not just, they want to be the best, not just they want, the best performing funds. They want to be first at any cost. And I think that race to be first is really, is a different goal than what we've seen historically. And I think that race to be first also affects how service providers support different clients. And so some clients, will want to engage you on an exclusive basis. If you're working with them on an innovative product that is, where the goal is to be first, they may want you to only be able to help them be first, right? So it changes, the demographic of clients you can work with. There are different arrangements in place. I've just been very surprised by how how service providers are really committing and really almost have a horse in the race, right? So when you look at, the race to launch the first spot Bitcoin ETF, an attorney has to kind of make a decision, what ETF issuer are you going to support in doing that, right? Because if you help one client be first, it'll be to the detriment of another client. And when you're talking about a particularly novel asset class, where being first will be monumental. So I agree with you that we're in a different era, and I think it's going to continue to evolve.
I could not agree with you more. This race to first, especially in some of these new asset classes that we're talking about, is going to be more important than ever. And Amrita, you at VIA, the incredibly experienced team that you lead, have brought some really interesting products to market. What's your perspective on the industry right now?
I think the sky's the limit. I try to think about what could come next, and I haven't come up with it. I mean, certainly the focus on digital assets, I think, is taking up quite a bit of mind share and a bit of attention, I think, for issuers and service providers, and of course the ETF media, and certainly just given the SEC's position on things such as spot Bitcoin, I think make it really easy to focus on that and that particularly exciting race. But I do wonder what else is next. For a while there, I really thought it was going to be non-transparent active, but more and more we see that new issuers and really established asset management firms that are launching their first or maybe their second tranche of ETFs, they're all opting to go transparent active. And so I think the shift to active has certainly occurred. I mean, look at the number of launches that were active launches in 2020 and 2021. I mean, it's just a major increase. And certainly from our vantage as we support new issuers, I mean, we're just talking active all the time. I just said to, Rafael Zayas yesterday, our head of portfolio management trading, that it's been a long time since someone came to us with a quote unquote basic index to track. Our launches have gotten more sophisticated. The strategies that we're managing have become more sophisticated, whether they have, futures overlays or a shorting component, or they want to incorporate, some type of digital asset or digital asset adjacent, security like a Bitcoin future. It's just become more and more complicated. And so the one thing that I know for sure is that ETF education of the broader investor marketplace will only continue to grow, will only continue to be more important. And each and every one of us as a participant in this industry has an important role to play in that investor education. That's the one thing I'm sure of.
I think you're so accurate. And I also think, reflecting back on what you talked about and always wanting to learn, I feel like the innovation and the pace of innovation in this industry makes us all continue to learn and provides that opportunity to stay on the front foot of all the things that are going on and how rapidly things are changing. And the importance of good partners. Like you said, some of these more sophisticated strategies, finding the right partners, certainly including the two of you, is going to play an even more important role as some of these more unique boutique firms start to come into the market with these really interesting strategies. So I could continue talking to both of you for the rest of the day, but I want to wrap up with really one final question for our audience, as I think they've heard about your unique journeys, your thoughts as women in this industry. And I would love for you just to share if there's just a couple of lessons learned or ongoing sources of inspiration that you think of, just to sort of leave our guests, or our listeners with as we wrap up today. Aisha, let's start with you. Sorry, I keep forgetting to do that.
Sure. I mean, I think two big takeaways from my journey have been you can't ask for enough advice and feedback, and people are very generous in giving advice and feedback. And so I think that's an opportunity that one would be remiss to not take advantage of throughout their professional journey. The other thing that I think is really important, especially for women in our industry, is to not play small. right? To not just to be happy that you're at the table, but really to bring a voice to that table and bring ideas to that table and innovation to that table. And so I really encourage people to not play small. Definitely you need to learn, and it takes a while to go up the learning curve to develop, deep expertise. But once you start to develop that expertise, you want to make sure you're doing, everything you can to show up for yourself and professionally show up in the industry by not playing small.
That's awesome. Ask for advice, always be learning, and don't play small. Amrita, what about you?
Yes, I love when Aisha says that. She has reminded me to not play small many times in the past, and every time I hear her say it, including today, it's just so empowering. It's so motivating. So I love that she ended with that. I would echo the first one for sure. Don't be afraid to ask for help often and from as many people as possible. I think earlier in our careers, especially as women, I don't know how we get this notion that if you ask for help or you admit you don't know something and you need help, that people will think you're not intelligent or that you shouldn't be at the table. That's not true. I think some of the smartest people I've worked with would freely admit what they didn't know, and I always respected that so much. And asking for help and asking to learn and asking to be taught shows people that you really want to get better and that you want to grow. And I think it's very hard not to respect that. So I always say, don't be afraid to ask for help. That's number one. Number two is leverage the network. Leverage the network. Just if you want to be in this industry, if you want to continue to grow and develop and get new opportunities, meet as many people as you can and let as many people know as you can that that's what you want to do. Even if I've had times where I've just reached out to women that I've met through women in ETFs or even LinkedIn and just said, you seem like you have a really interesting role, and I just love to learn more about that. Could we have a call or meet up for coffee? And I did just that, and that's how I was able to find my way to VanEck. And then when I was ready to try something new, I let as many people know as possible. And a couple of years later, one of those individuals remembered and was able to connect me with Vince Burley, the founder and CEO of InFLXtion, who I would have never met had I not told somebody, hey, I'm ready to try something new. I'm ready to be challenged. And so, you hear it often, but I constantly find myself saying this: the ETF industry is so small. It's so small. Somebody will remember. You just have to let people know that you want to be there and what you want to do. And you do that enough times, somebody will remember, and that's how you will learn about your next great opportunity. I truly believe it. I am the prime example of that.
I don't know that there are better pieces of advice to leave our listeners with, to nurture that network, grow it, nurture it, care for it. I think that's so important. The thing that I think you both exemplify, that neither of you touched on, but I think is important to note. And the reason, Amrita, I think to your point about the network and opportunities, is you've both created your own personal brands, right? I've done the same. And that personal brand is so important. And to continue to lean into it and nurture it as part of your broader network is certainly really important as well. So I can't thank you both enough for the opportunity to have this discussion today. We've taken a trip through both of your journeys and also your perspective on women in the industry, which I think has left our listeners with just incredible nuggets to take away. And if I were to just reiterate those awesome takeaways you just shared, ask for advice, don't be afraid to ask for help, always keep learning, don't play small, and leverage your network. It's incredible advice as a takeaway. And I really appreciate you making the time for us. And hopefully we'll get a chance to do this again very soon.
Thank you so much, Jillian.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you so much. Really enjoyed talking to both of you this morning.
Thank you. The information contained in this recording is provided as is for educational and informational purposes only and should not serve as the basis for any trading or investing decisions. Flex Networks makes no representations and disclaims all express, implied, and statutory warranties of any kind to any viewer, listener, or other third party. Neither Flex Networks nor any of its affiliates make any endorsement of any particular company, security, product, or financial strategy, and nothing contained in this recording should be construed as investment advice. Investors should undertake their own due diligence and carefully evaluate companies before investing.